Bruins Beat is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. What's going on?
Now that much Bruins development camp is underway. What a hectic 2 weeks. You got you had the draft, free agency. Now you've got development camp going on, which will be through the end of the week. Scrimmages on Friday. But everything that everyone is talking about has to do with free agency, especially around here. And Bruins were active on the first day of free agency, which Elon Musk and Twitter decided, hey, why would we want to see tweets about these things on such a day? We don't need
Who
that.
needs it?
Who needs
You
that?
have that. You have that. You have the signings. Damian Lillard's trying to get traded. You don't need to be in the loop on those things, Devin. Who cares?
Who cares? Who cares is right. But what a complete cluster that was. I mean, my goodness. It's funny. I actually opened Twitter. I was off for a little bit, and I opened Twitter to look at tweets, and just rate limit exceeded. I was like, oh, I must be, I don't know, it must be a glitch or something. And I kept going back, and then I saw it was trending, and I was like, oh, don't even tell me. Don't even tell me. But fortunately or unfortunately, the Twitter stuff seemed to go away for the Tyler Bertuzzi news, which is where I want to start. Tyler Bertuzzi, you and I think most people thought Taylor Hall gets traded, Bertuzzi comes in, and they chose Bertuzzi over Hall. Wasn't the case. But the more that we hear about the situation, the more that comes out about the situation, I think people's first reaction when Tyler Bertuzzi signed in Toronto for 1 year, $5.5 million, was everyone said, oh, that's Sweeney's fault. That's Sweeney's fault. Sweeney must be lying. But again, Greg Wyshynski tweeted, Tyler Bertuzzi's agent, Todd Reynolds, tells ESPN that they were seeking a long-term deal in free agency. There were some on the table, but no contending team was close to $5.5 million annually. So they pivoted to a 1 year deal on a contending team with the cap jumping next summer. Regarding the Bruins, Bertuzzi's camp wanted a long-term deal, couldn't find common ground on money. They go to market, Bruins move on to other business. By the time the pivot to a 1 year deal happened, Bruins had already committed the cap space to other players. That's on Bertuzzi and his camp. That's not, I'm not trying to play Mr. Defend the Team here, but that to me seems way more on Bertuzzi's agent and their camp than Bruins.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it, I think, when you have a situation here where an asset you want to retain ultimately moves on, I think there's, misgivings or misreads from all parties. But yeah, I think if you're doling out blame, I think a big chunk of it has to go to Bertuzzi and his representatives in terms of misreading the market from the first place. Because let's face it, yes, it's almost like we have to, tackle this in different segments, but the Bruins ideally wanted to keep Bertuzzi. That wasn't part of the, that wasn't a question. And they didn't want to sign him to a 1 year deal, that's for sure. Now, was it a 4 year deal, 5 year deal? And honestly, I think if you're a Bruins fan and trying to find that middle ground between keeping a guy like Bertuzzi, who obviously fit in well here, he gave you an added element on the net front, worked out well with David Pastrnak. You want to keep him, but at a 5 year deal, that's great. If the Bruins announced on Saturday they signed him to 5 years, 5.5, Bruins Twitter probably doing backflips, right? In terms of you're signing him for cheaper than Taylor Hall. You have him signed long term, but I think there's something you touched on, Evan, that you look at his injury history, his skating. It's not something you really want to lock in a 6-7 year deal for. So if you're the Bruins and you made the effort to try to sign Tyler Bertuzzi and you're like, we've got 5 years, 4 or 5 years, 5.5, 6 even. And he said no because him and his agent thought that they were going to get 6-7 on the market. Are you going to begrudge the Bruins for being like, all right, that's our best deal? We have so many roster spots to fill up. We can't just sit here and wait for you to hit the market and probably get what they thought was going to be a similar deal. I assume the Bruins, once they let Bertuzzi go and get to free agency, they thought he was going to sign a 6-7 year deal. I think what a lot of us really assumed as soon as those reports kind of first came out. So I don't think you can begrudge the Bruins for doing that, of signing him to, I think, a pretty fair deal, I think, considered in terms of giving him security, maybe not 6-7 years, 4 or 5 works out pretty well, I think, considered. And so for then, him to really, his market is really dried up. Again, really brutal market anyway, which I'm sure we'll touch on in terms of the amount of guys signing below level deals. But for him to then pivot to a 1 year deal, the Bruins, what are you supposed to do really in that situation? And yes, you can talk about, they should have freed up more cap space. They should have traded Olmark. They should have traded Forbort, what have you, which again, I think it's more an indictment on the market, where I think we've already talked about it, right? Like, if the Bruins had a team willing to take Ullmark for a first, or Ullmark was going to be a key piece in a trade for a guy like Elias Lindholm, I think the Bruins probably do it. But you look at the way the market was, right? Whether it's you're giving up Taylor Hall for 2 fringe defensemen, or the Islanders are giving up Josh Bailey and a second-round pick just for future considerations. The market is wacky right now, especially in terms of teams with cap space having all this leverage. So Bruins aren't going to be able to just craft out another $5 million in cap space right away, unless you're giving up the reigning Vezina winner for, a 4th or 5th round pick, which I don't think they were going to do just to fit in Bertuzzi. So, it's just a rough situation all around. But yeah, if you're looking at what I think is the catalyst in terms of what has sparked now Bertuzzi signing a 1-year prove-it deal with Toronto, I think a lot of it falls in his camp for not wanting to take whatever the Bruins had originally offered, which again was probably going to be a pretty fair deal because they want him here, not just for this year, but in the years ahead.
That's exactly it. And I also think it goes back to, the fact that Bertuzzi's camp seemed to fumble this. Now granted, there is the side of like, he's going to go to Toronto. If he plays with Matthews and Marner, he's going to have a lot of points. Someone next offseason with the cap going up is going to give him a lot of money, probably more than maybe he'd make this offseason. Unless those injury things kick in, he'll be a year older. There are other parts of his game that I think might not age well. We've touched on this, previously. But I wanted Bertuzzi. You wanted Bertuzzi. Everyone wanted Bertuzzi on this team. He made sense. He was a fit. He was, he was a Bruin. At the same time, though, I do like what the Bruins did here. Don't bend over backwards. Again, if he was a center, right? If Tyler Bertuzzi was a center, it's a different story. That's a position of real need. You need that. On this team, granted, this hurts your offensive depth 100%. 100%. This hurts your offensive depth, and we'll get to some moves they made that might try to kind of, as you said, moneyball Bruins, try to replace him in the aggregate. But I don't think this was a situation you bend over backwards for. They tried. They clearly put something on the table that was, as you said, fair and reasonable. That they said, no, I think we can get more, again, Sweeney said term and AAV. Again, if that's what we're being told that, so, I'll go off of it. And again, you don't do that over a second line left wing, which again, he provides a lot, but as we've said, his game could age badly. Like that's the thing about him. And I think, I think the Bruins realize that. That's why they probably weren't, according to reports, extending to, beyond 5 years. So again, it hurts that he's on Toronto. It hurts that he's there. Because again, I guarantee he's going to put up points against you this year. He's going to put up a lot of points in general, most likely. But at the same time, my guess is I don't know how much. Like Toronto was already good offensively. You and I have discussed this off air. Like they still don't have any goalie that you trust. Defensively, they just kind of sign these fringe top pairing defenders and hope that someone kind of, when the Red Sox were trying to find a starting pitch, like a number one ace, and they just kept like getting middle of the rotation guys, hoping one would pan out. That's kind of like the Leafs right now on defense, hoping someone pans out. Again, Bertuzzi makes them better up front, but I don't think they really needed to get better up front. Still, though, it hurts that he's on arrival against you.
That hurts. I mean, I think it's just a situation where, again, the Bruins would have loved to keep Bertuzzi. Like, it's not like they're all like, all right, peace out. Like, we'll go back to the drawing board. Like, they really wanted to keep him. It's just the way the market kind of shifted there, and kind of how Bertuzzi's agent played ball kind of put them in this spot. And that's the unfortunate thing. It's just the Bruins are in a spot where they don't have a lot of leeway or patience, in terms of they weren't granted the ability of where they're missing just a piece or two where they could wait it out a little bit to get him. And people are like, oh, the Bruins opted, they had to sign Lucic first. They had to do all this stuff. It's not like the Bruins had 1 or 2 moves to make, and they could have just waited to see what Bertuzzi decided to do. Like, you saw how crazy this market was. Like, they had to fill up multiple roster spots very quickly. And yes, like you can make the case that Lucic was always going to sign here, and he didn't have to sign him right at 12:01 or what have you. But I think you look at guys like Shattenkirk, who I guarantee you a team like Tampa or a team like Carolina would have loved to pick him up for $1 million. You look at a guy like Morgan Geekie, who we'll talk about, who Is he going to be there on Sunday if you're not willing to sign him right then for 2 years, $2 million per year? So it's one of those things where you look at just how many roster spots the Bruins had to fill up in a short amount of time without having to go really bargain bin shopping on Sunday. If you want to wait that long, like, you're just not afforded that opportunity. Some of that is of your own doing in terms of going all in last year and being in this cap crunch in the first place, but you couldn't just wait around. It wasn't like the Bruins just decided to like go pivot in the other direction. They had to fill up these spots with the limited amount of cap space they had. Unless you really wanted to really scrape the bottom of the barrel on Sunday, you had to move on from Bertuzzi and make those moves on Saturday, even if it means shutting the door right away.
Yeah. I go back to that. Like, you have to move on. You can't wait forever. You need third and fourth line players. We've discussed this, and they did that. They went out and did that. And again, Bertuzzi goes to Toronto for a year and $5.5 million. In terms of free agency moves, you mentioned some of them there. We'll start with Van Riemsdyk because he's an interesting one. 1 year, $1 million. It's interesting. This Bruins team, you put this team on paper in like 2014. Ooh, you have a cup favorite. But I think JVR brings some value for net front presence guy you can throw on the power play. If he is, the opening night, second line left wing with Zacha and Pasternak, we haven't really been given a huge indication on who that might be because it's July 3rd. But if that is him, you can expect some production playing next to Zacha and Pasternak. Is it riveting and exciting and, must watch? Not really. But I don't know. I think there's some potential there to at least kind of do something. It's not a complete black hole on that left side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to see how Van Riemsdyk does. Again, I think that the jury's going to be out on whether he's like your locked in second line player there. Like, you'd ideally probably want him more in the third line, but such is the hand you've kind of been dealt. But in terms of, I think when you look at all these different players that they signed, it's all about, I think, just what their roles are and how it fits into what the Bruins are trying to do this year. And if Van Riemsdyk can park himself in front of the on the net front on the first power play, clean up plays, was known, for years as a guy who also had a really good touch around the net in terms of making those quick plays. Maybe not as good as Bertuzzi was, but adds that extra development at a lot cheaper price range. So I think you look at just what he brings, what like a guy like Shattenkirk does in Clifton's spot, and just what the payout is in terms of, like him, Geeky, Van Riemsdyk, a few of these other players for what the price range is. If you're able to still field a roster with these guys that can still, carry out whatever you're trying to look for them in that specific spot, while also keeping the door open for allowing younger players to incorporate themselves into the lineup, like, people can look at just the Bruins free agent signings here. And yes, they're not groundbreaking, they're not headline stealing, what have you, but I think you look at just what their plan is this year. I think for your Bruins fan, you should be maybe not excited is the right word, but I think you should look forward to this year finally having a little bit more clarity in terms of just where the team is going. Like, and again, it's tough to say that this offseason where we're still waiting to hear about Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. That's still the biggest domino that needs to fall. But I think you look at this season and how they've built it out, you're going to see what guys like Lucic and Van Riemsdyk can bring, and what those roles are. And I think you keep those expectations in check. But you look at like what a guy like Geeky can bring. Can he be like another guy like Zacha who can maybe take a step forward, more minutes? I think finally you're going to see more clarity in terms of the future of the team in terms of prospects, right? Like, is Van Riemsdyk the starting, second line guy? But what if Merkulov makes a push there? What if a guy like Beecher or Lauko, settle into the fourth line and fight for minutes next to a guy like Patrick Brown, or even Geeky if he's kind of pushed into that role? I think for the Bruins, it's, you're dealt a pretty crappy hand, but in terms of how many roster spots you had to fill and what these guys can provide in terms of what their set roles are going to be, you can see what the line of thinking was for the Bruins. And if the crappy hand they were dealt leads to this year where you can still arguably be competitive, which I'm sure we'll touch on, throughout this offseason in terms of just how viable they are this year. If you can bridge this year with still solid pieces, incorporate young talent, and then we obviously look at 2024, you're kind of making the most of a pretty crappy hand that you have. So
before we continue on with the conversation, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. The most important thing of this whole free agency, they didn't overpay for anybody. Yeah. They did not commit to anybody long term. They didn't overpay. You look around the league, guys like Radko Gudas, Alex Killorn, both the same team. You look at the Islanders locking, two
Mayfield
middle tier defensemen for 7 years. None of that. You just signed guys to 1 and 2 year deals. Nothing more than $2 million. I mean, Geeky got $2 million per, but Lucic $1 million, Shattenkirk $1 million, Van Riemsdyk $1 million. Like you had a budget and you worked within the constraints of it, and it's clearly a bridge team. There's a little bit of potential, especially as you said. Geeky's an interesting one, 6'3", big center. Could be a kind of a prominent guy at the bottom six. The other thing I think you should be sort of in for is, it would not shock me if they went back to Marchand, if Bergeron returns, Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak for portions of the year, because then you'd have DeBrusk, Zacha, and potentially Coyle as a second line. And you can use Geeky on the third line with James Van Riemsdyk. And that stuff we can get to closer to opening night, but you do have some options. It's not Bertuzzi like you would have hoped. But there is something there. It's not just nothingness, which I think is what we all feared going into it. But the other one I want to hit on is Lucic, because my God, wow. Talk about a guy who was definitely open about wanting to be back, went out and bought his hat, Bruins hat. I will say, though, whether or not he fits this team, how much he plays this year, whatever it might be, if he's still got even a little bit left in the tank, it is a cool feel-good story. I'll say it. It was cool seeing the videos of him the other day, just being like a kid in a candy store, just like so excited. Now, if he's getting in the way of younger players playing, then you have to do what you got to do. But cool nonetheless to see. A cool little story. You get to sell some jerseys from that if you're the Bruins. I guess that it's a good thing. But again, I'm not like completely against it. It's good, fine. $1 million. This wasn't Nick Foligno getting a year at $4 million. This is just a year, $1 million. You see what you got in the guy, and I see where it takes you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I think the critics of it in terms of whether he's taking up a spot or how much he has left in the tank. I still think it's prefaced by people still being like, yeah, it's pretty cool to have him back. I'm still pretty jazzed about it. Like, it's a guy who's obviously, you listen to his Zoom call after he signs and just how enthusiastic he is. And that's something that Sweeney kind of mentions, is that obviously you look at the physicality, the physical deterrent, what he can bring on the forecheck if his motor's going there. Something that, again, you kind of look at the makeup of this forward core. A lot of big boys all of a sudden between him, like Brown, Geeky 6'3", like Van Riemsdyk's a big body. You kind of built up or beefed up your forward core there a little bit. So if they're a team that, yeah, exactly. Like, again, if you look at kind of the identity of this team, again, how competitive they are depends on if Bergeron comes back, and that's kind of the biggest thing. But you look at this team where obviously they're not probably now moving Olmark. The market was not conducive to that anyway, but you still have probably the best the best goalie tandem in the league, a defense that, before you got Orlov, still led the way towards a record-setting season. Like, it's still a very good decor, even with the flaws that I'm sure we'll discuss later on this offseason. But you're built from the net out with a really effective puck-moving defense, and all of a sudden you've got a very heavy forward core that maybe it's a little bit more puck possession-oriented instead of chances off the rush. Like, you still have a formula in place where you can grind things out, wear teams down, and potentially make some noise. And when you look at just where this team was just a few months ago in terms of getting eliminated, looking at the bonus overages, how much little cap space you had, I think you kind of take that for what this team is, right? Who knows? Maybe like a guy like Lucic or Van Riemsdyk surprises you. Maybe a guy like Geeky takes a big push. Maybe you get excited, like you look back at like that 17-18 team where it's like, guys like Bjork or DeBrusque score one of their first games and you have these younger players that are trying to fight their way into the lineup and give you something. Like there should be that
almost
level
50 points that year.
Yeah, like there should be, I think, kind of that level of, as I said, getting at more clarity or more an idea of where this team is headed in. I'm sure we'll either touch on it later on or just later on this summer of just what these signings have done. As you said, it gives them flexibility. It's not like you're locked into these deals that, again, we look at all these other teams that are really rebuilding, these teams like Detroit or Buffalo, and how arduous it can be to really build a contending team from scratch again. Like Buffalo's on its way, but look at Detroit and like just how they're now signing these random guys. That's a team that wants to do well. They're the Detroit Red Wings. Like they want to be a successful team and they just haven't gotten back there yet. You look at where the Bruins are with the foundation they have in place. How many teams would kill to have a 60-goal scorer in Pastrnak sign long-term, McAvoy, Lindholm, Swayman, Ullmark? We assume Swayman's going to sign a new deal. Like Zacha is a guy that could be a 50-point, second-line center for under $5 million. Like you've got a pretty good foundation in place, and by signing these cheap deals, you're not only allowing younger players to maybe take a step forward, but you're also setting yourself up for a more extensive retool where you can build upon that foundation next summer. So I think you look at where this team is right now and where it's going. Is optimism the right word? But I think there should be excitement for the fact that I think you see the path the Bruins have charted. It's not going to be a full rebuild. So it's going to be tearing everything down. They're too good to do that. They have too many guys signed long term. But you have options moving forward, which when you look at teams like Tampa that aren't getting any younger, you look at these other teams that are trying to, take that next step forward. The Bruins are going to be right in that mix for this foreseeable future, and they could really take some big swings next summer. So
that's the thing you wrote about it for Boston.com in the sense of next summer, the amount of cap space that'll be open, that could even be more open because of the cap going up, and the options that they might have next year. I mean, it really opens up a lot of doors. Again, the grass is always greener down the road, but that genuinely is greener than this offseason. And you mentioned it again, like they're going to be a team based on their goaltending, they're going to be a team based on their defense. The other thing I think is important to note that we'll, I think, touch on a lot more later in the offseason is the rest of the Atlantic. In past years, it's been a 3-team division. This year, obviously, the Panthers kind of came into, went to the Stanley Cup final. But even just like an early look ahead to the 23-24 season, right? The Bruins, we know their situation. The Leafs still don't have a goalie. They're over the cap by $8 million.
Without signing Samsonov.
That too. You got to figure that out. The Lightning are not getting any younger. They're getting older, and pieces are kind of slowly falling off that, like Ross Colton and things like that. The Panthers just came off a Stanley Cup final push that really was lightning in a bottle. But, again, good for them. I'm not taking anything away from it. But Matthew Tkachuk has a pretty bad injury, and I think the status is unknown if he's going to be ready to go to start next season. And, the Sabres are up and coming, which is great. But are they really ready to kind of compete in that space for a playoff spot? Potentially, still going to have to figure out what's going on in net. The Canadians are far away from contending. The Senators are going to lose to Brinkett. They're going to be farther away from contending.
I hated that Korpisalo deal too.
Oh my God.
It's seeing that they're building something, then you're like, no, don't do that. You're kind of either trying to accelerate or it's almost like beat Buffalo where just you build from within and guys hit and just keep on chugging along. It's like, I don't really like what Buffalo and even Detroit where they're kind of just in this no man's land where they're just signing these B tier kind of guys that I don't know how that makes up a team that you can build around for the future. So
I don't get it. Detroit was the same way last offseason. They went out and got a bunch of guys on day one of free agency, and it was like, what is the point of this? But again, like Senators, Red Wings are kind of that same area. Like even that Chychrun deal you look back at, and it's like, I mean, it makes sense because he's a good young defenseman, but like, when are you going to plan on competing? And then, again, my point is it's sort of open. It's, I don't think granted, I'm not saying the Bruins are going to win the Atlantic. I don't think they will as of right now. But they're going to be competitive. They're going to be in it. And I think a free agency day like the Bruins had this past weekend, sort of solidifies that. One last question, Connor. Are they done? And I don't mean free agency. Trades wise, do you think there's more to come? Do you think there's the next shoe to drop? Is there something coming?
I mean, I think you just got to find out what Bergeron's doing. That's the biggest thing, right? Like, I think in a perfect situation, he comes back and you don't have to do that much other than signing your RFAs, right? The last thing you want to do is trade more pieces away to get a guy like Elias Lindholm or what have you. Not saying that they shouldn't if like he's available, but best case scenario is Bergeron comes back. Don't have to tweak too much. Don't have to move more money out. Bergeron retires next year after the centennial season. We'll see what happens. Hell, like, this friggin' team could go on a run next year by just pounding like the crap out of teams in the playoffs. Like who the hell knows? Bergeron retires, and then all of a sudden
I'll clip that.
Yeah, all of a sudden you've got $30 million to then sign Lindholm in free agency, and you're chugging right along, right? Like that's the best case scenario. So I think it all depends on. Like I don't think there's any other moves coming in terms of another defenseman, another winger, or anything like that. I think it all just comes down to what's going to happen down the middle. And it's going to, again, Coyle and Zacha held their own for a few games against Florida in the playoffs, asking a whole lot in terms of having those guys fill out that role in a similar vein for 82 games. And just, I think the domino effect, right, of like Coyle, Zacha, and then Fredericks at 3C, or is it Kiki? Like you're just putting guys in spots where maybe you're asking a lot from them over a full season. So I think it's all going to depend on what Bergeron does. Because, again, Bruins probably don't want to waste more assets to get a center at the trade market when ideally you can throw a crap ton of money at them next summer.
Exactly. I agree. And then one last other thing I forgot to mention. Credit to Garnet Hathaway, Connor Clifton,
yes.
Nick Foligno, going out, securing the bag. We are
yes.
a pro securing the bag podcast. But I will say,
guys.
I'm happy that the Bruins were not the ones to be giving those payouts because they were pretty big payouts. But again, I'm excited to see Connor Clifton in Buffalo. Does he fit with a Power or Deline? You think of like Power's a very good, solid, borderline stay at home, mainly two-way defense. And then you got Connor Clifton just buzzing all over the ice. So that'll be cool to see. Garnet Hathaway, Philadelphia. I mean, good for Hathaway, but I mean, Philadelphia is just, some of the signings they've made have made a lot of sense. Briere, though, has made some good moves as GM, so I'll give him that in that sense. And good for Mike Riley, by the way, going down to Florida. Going to hopefully get some playing time.
Should be playing in the NHL, so good to see him back there. So
yes, and Chris Wagner in Colorado. That's another one.
Yes.
So hopefully there's a spot for him out there. So again, I think the biggest thing with free agency is you always kind of cringe because you're like, what's the team? What are the Bruins going to do? What kind of big contracts they're going to dole out? They kind of just played it smart. They hit singles here, which is, I think, in free agency, all you really need to do. Conor, before you go, what can people look forward to from you over at Boston.com and the Globe?
Yeah, we'll have you covered every step of the way this offseason. We've gone past the frantic part of free agency, but again, whether it's dev camp, any other moves down the pipeline, I'm sure throughout the rest of this summer, we'll be looking at players like Van Riemsdyk, Geeky, see where they fit into the lineup, what they can give in those different roles, younger players, how they can make a push. There's still so many other things that can go on as this offseason continues. So I'll be covered every step of the way over at Boston.com. So please read over there. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that. And remember to go subscribe to New England Hockey Journal. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.